So that's how it works. All right, so here we are live. So welcome one and all to another Taidu Studios live stream. I'm your host, Sean Taidu Head. And before we get started, I'd like to address an issue that is affecting many of us today. If you're finding this day a little harder than usual, if the world seems a little colder and a little more gray than before, it could just be because your circadian rhythms have been jolted. You may be living in a place that just made the switch from daylight savings time, or switch to daylight savings time. 34% of countries on Earth observe the DST. In a recent poll, 54% of Americans said that they would prefer to end daylight savings time, and a bill was introduced in the U.S. Congress this week to allow each state to choose on their own if they wish to continue observing it or not. This idea is not modern, though. Ancient cultures adjusted their markings of time seasonally, dividing the daylight into 12 equal segments, regardless of their actual length. In the US, there is a persistent myth that DST was enacted to assist farmers, but farmers have historically been against the practice. The start of agricultural work is not set by a clock time. It's actually inhibited by factors like morning dew, the willingness of dairy cattle to be milked, or the laying of hens, of which are dictated by the sun. Regardless of what time it is in your neck of the woods, we've got a great show lined up for you today. Our special guest is LeRon Harrison. Dr. Harrison holds a PhD in East Asian languages and literatures and is currently researching passages and illustrations in the Taigen show that reference the Shakuhachi in Japanese imperial court music. So as we get started, feel free to post your questions in the chat. Anything about Japanese history, Japanese language, Japanese culture, shakuhachi, and especially gagaku. Now, before we jump in, what do you know about Japanese and timekeeping?
Well, in the same sort of view of that, one of the things that you often encounter in history is the changing of eras. Now we kind of have the fixed eras because from the Meiji period, right? The emperors would always have one emperor would have one reign. So Meiji, Taisho, Showa, Heisei, Reiwa, right? But before that, you'd have reign changes for anything. So some disastrous event would happen and they change the reign name. So yeah, so you'd have emperors where the reign name changes, 5, 6, 7 times. So kind of in the same vein of that, it was like again, if there's something auspicious happening, they're changing the reign name. If there's something disastrous happens, they're changing the reign name. So so part of working in pre-modern Japanese history or literature is you have to have you know either a dictionary or something that kind of tells you the reign names because they're keeping time by these reign names, and then all of a sudden the reign name has changed, and you're thinking it's a new emperor, and it's like no, it's the same emperor, but it's changed because something happened.
Yeah, big fire broke out and the kami are upset. Therefore, you got to rename the year and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So, in your own words, can you give us a 45-second introduction on what it is the heck that you do?
Research wise, yes, like you said, I'm trained as a scholar of Japanese poetry, of Japanese court poetry. Um, haven't done it for a while. I'm going to start getting back into it and writing stuff directed toward that. Primarily these days, scholarly, I'm looking at Gagaku, like you said, the stuff on Taigen Show that's there. Taigen Show just in itself is one text that's great for me. But then the other stuff that I do is I write about martial arts and primarily the concept of practice, which came over into Gagaku because of that work and being able to say that Gagaku is a practice, or Shakuhachi is a practice, or Koto is a practice, and what comes out of that. So those are the two ones with the literary stuff needing to kind of get back in there because I've got an article in a book. I'm like, okay, well now the literary stuff is looking a little lonely. We better do something to kind of make them feel better.
Absolutely.
Put something up in the literary section.
And so Now, what got you interested in Gagaku in the first place?
Um, let's see. Well, I was always interested in everything Japanese, and
Hmm.
so when I was as an undergrad was collecting all the CDs, so I have Shakuhachi, Koto, Shamisen, and Gagaku. But growing up in LA, the question that I would always see is I would always see Shamisen, Shakuhachi, and Koto, and the question was always, is there something more than this? And I think that's where the interest in Garaku kind of started, and then it came to be in 2003 when I was doing my PhD work that there was a news article about a Garaku performance, and got in touch with the author, and from there I entered the world officially.
And so for you, you play primarily the Hichiriki.
Nowadays, the new techie. I entered in the is as a Nikki player, and it's been hard to find the right read now. So I've kind of segued over into playing Ryuteki.
Mm.
So
And are you enjoying Ryuteki more, or are you still is Hichiriki your first love?
I think now I'm just a man of whatever you need to be, and I
Mm.
think that goes back to when I was in Japan and leaving, and Teramoto Sensei at the group that I was in and saw it and saw me and said, you know, for a foreigner playing this music, you have to be able to play multiple instruments. You can't just simply sit because he saw me playing. He saw me with a Utah and kind of trying to play it, and he was made that observation. He's like, you cannot simply be a one instrument person. You have to have this ability in all instruments because there aren't that many players outside of Japan. So you have to be able to kind of play a number of instruments because again, demand will put you where you need. So I have no problem with moving that way. I just kind of would like to kind of get the Hichidiki ability back because again, I need to kind of have both of them, and especially now that I'm on my own, it's like it would be nice to be able to pull the Hichiriki out and do that. I'll never be a show player. My hands are too big. My hands are too big to play a show.
Mm.
Um, but again, that diversability is something that you need as a non-Japanese player of Garaku.
Now, traditionally speaking, and so by the way, what the world's saying, Hichiriki and Ryuteki are both instruments as well as sho. They're instruments that make up the orchestra, which we'll probably get into in a little bit. But classically speaking, is it not true that many Gagaku players learned all of the disciplines of the instruments, or did they specialize only on one instrument?
Well, you were supposed so Garaku technically there's four elements to it. There's instrumental music, dance, vocal music, and ritual music, kagura. So those are the four kind of categories that actually are kind of underneath the umbrella of gagaku. And you're supposed to be able to, amongst the instruments, there's the wind instruments that we talked about, the ryuteki, the hichiriki, the sho, the string instruments, the biwa, and the gakso or the sonokoto or koto, which people are more familiar with. There's the percussion instruments, the shoko, taiko, and the kakko. So traditionally, you were supposed to be able to have one wind, one string, one percussion, and have knowledge of dance. That would be an accomplished musician in the court sense of it.
Now,
So
when you say dance, are you meaning, and this is actually one of the questions we have from Hitsuji-chan, is this
mm,
dance music like a stage dance music, or is this like, we're in the Baroque era, we're all doing the jik here?
no, these are dances that go with a specific piece. So the dance has a set pattern, and then there's a musical accompaniment with it.
Hmm. So we're not doing a bourrée. There's not just like any dance can go with any as
No,
long.
this is not. This is not. This is not. Social dancing. This is definitely a dance that had been created to be performed in front of the emperor and the imperial court,
Mhm.
and that's what you do. It has its own kind of robes and attires to do that, and so yes, the dancer. It could be one. It could be two. It could be four. But they go up and do this dance that the musicians will play the music for.
Mm. And now, when most people think of gagaku, the first thing they think of is eitenraku. Can you tell us a little bit about that piece and what genre it falls under in gagaku, and maybe something that can give the listener the next time they go in here a little bit more insight to this piece?
Eitinraku is usually the first piece you will learn. First of all, the thing about Eitinraku is if you actually, and I have them right here, if you actually kind of have the score, you will find three Eitinrakus in here. So there's the Hyojo one, which is the first one that you learn. And why you have two others
Before you
is
go on,
because,
what does it mean to say hyojo, by the way?
so Hyojo is the mode, it is the pitch, and then it is the mode in there. So based on the relationships from that pitch, there's certain notes that are favored in the compositions that are around in that mode. So Etenraku is the Hyojo Etenraku is the first piece of gagaku you will ever learn because it teaches the basic structure of how the music works. So that's always your intro piece is to learn Hyojo Eitenraku. Now, so I can, if you got a question, go ahead and ask.
No, totally fine. I just want to say that hyojo is the E pitch, and so there. And when he says mode, a mode is basically is a scale that is associated with that particular version. So what he's saying is that there's an eiten raku in the key of E, is how we would probably express it in the Western terminology.
Yeah, and so you end up with when you move that to the other two pieces, Oshiki. Oshiki is the highest pitch, that's an A, and then Banshiki is the lowest pitch, which is B in the Western scale. When you transpose it, it's not like in Western where you change the relationships. Because it's modal, it winds up changing different phrases, and so they don't sound the same. And for all intents and purposes, they are thought of as different pieces because they're not using the same relationship of pitches, right?
Yeah.
The pitches change from E to A to B,
Mm.
and all of those relationships change equally, and so you get whole new phrasing. So they're considered separate pieces. So you have three different etenrakus.
Yes, this is and if anybody's ever read William Wald's magnum opus of Japanese music and Japanese instruments, he also does mention this too. But it's a little bit vague on what he means when he's taught. And maybe it's that because he didn't study gagaku music that he's not quite sure of how the melodies change. Now, are we talking like octave displacement that's happening where because the instruments don't have this high pitch then the note drops down? Are we actually talking that the mode, it's like the note starts the same? So let's say in Eitenraku Hyojo the note starts in E, but when you play it in Oshiki, well, they have an E, but all the other notes shift and move around. Is that what it's happening, or is it actually that it starts in A?
The pitches will all still be the same. Oshiki is Oshiki, Banshiki is Banshiki, Hyojo is Hyojo. But again, since Oshiki is the highest pitch, right? If you're starting that, if that's the pitch of the mode, then what you're gonna have as opposed to Hyojo is that it will have these pitches that'll start high and then they'll drop down and then eventually get back up to it.
Oh, I see.
Whereas in Hyojo, Hyojo is E, so it does drop down and then it goes a little bit up above and then it comes back down to Hyojo. Whereas Banshiki has a lot more is the lower note on, especially for the hichiriki. It's one of the lower notes. So a lot of its pitches are falling down, right? So it'll
Hmm.
start high and it'll fall down to hit that banshiki. And so again, when it ends, it has to kind of come back down to that banshiki pitch. So that's how they're different.
Mm-hmm.
Is that core note where it is will say, how high or how low you can go. So banshiki means it's going up and then coming back down to banshiki.
Hmm.
Hyojo sits higher, so there's a lot more low, but then there's room to go above hyojo and then come back down. As opposed to oshiki, which is at the top, which means you can only kind of go down and then come back up.
Hmm. And then, so what type of genre is the piece Eitenraku? In which category does it fall under?
It's kangen. It's instrumental music.
Now, and that's different than kagura. And
Mhm.
what would be an example of kagura?
Kagura would be the music that you hear in shrines because this is the music usually for rituals for various deities.
Mm-hmm.
So there's the distinction of just kagura as this kind of music for general shrines, and then there's mi kagura, which is the imperial rites, the music for the imperial rites and rituals.
Mm.
So that's stuff that is there. But you still have them being performed in shrines, and especially big shrines like Ise Jingu and Izumo Taisha, right? So the big shrines that are to the big deities like Susanoo and Amaterasu will be doing those types of kagura because those are connected to the imperial family.
One thing I think that since you mentioned the name, um, Amaterasu, male or female?
Female. She
Mm.
is normally read as female.
Mm. Now, there, what I've heard is that Amaterasu was originally a male deity and then was changed, and there was some kind of switching that happened. And do you want to explain a little bit about what kind of happened there and why you can see that sometimes?
Mm. That's something that I have to look into because all the stuff that I've read of her has always read her as female, especially in light of the whole Susanoo Amaterasu kind of situation in the Kojiki, has always read her as female. Again, yeah, because kami really are just kind of connected more to nature. Nature is not necessarily gendered one way or the other in its root, but over time they are read. Gender is read into the myth, and the tendency is that Amaterasu is read female, Susanoo is read male.
Mm, mm, mm. Yeah,
So that's the way I would say it is if you're seeing gender fluidity again, it's remember that all of these kami originally are supposed to be some manifestation of some natural form.
mhm.
So yeah, gender really shouldn't apply, but it gets mapped onto to kami like that.
Yes, it's very interesting as well. Now, I'll send you the resource that I found on it. It's a very interesting scholarly work. But
Okay.
I want to bring it to the shakuhachi. And because you are doing a lot of work with the shakuhachi in regards to the Taigen show, and also other historical documents like the Kyokun show, and many other places that are mentioning the shakuhachi and how it was used or maybe was used in the Gagaku world. So, briefly, just tell us a little bit about some of the findings on shakuhachi and what are some things that have piqued your interest.
So largely for me, it's been the Taigen show. And so the Taigen show in its fifth chapter has the last section is devoted to the shakuhachi. And the notions that seem to be saying that the shakuhachi was something that was played, in this case in Toyohara Nobunaki's family had this knowledge, and so he's holding on to it because there was the Onin War in 1467, where Kyoto was a battlefield for a decade. So that was when he came into court. So he's already been conscious of the loss of this music potentially. So when he's writing Taigen Show as in his later years in life, he's collecting all this stuff. So he collects that, his great grandfather played the shakuhachi at, the rehearsal for the Iwashi Mizuhachiman Festival. So it seems like it was played. Another place that it actually does appear and seems to appear is it appears in the world of No. That it seems like what Muniaki's great grandfather had a student Zoami who was the premier actor of Sarugakuden. It was called Sarugakuden, Sarugaku and Dengaku. So he was a Dengaku player, but this is still all what it will eventually become No. And the question that comes up is that he mentioned in Sarugaku Dangi and these conversations about Sarugaku that Zeami, the big name about what will become No, writes about. And he says in there that Zoami had this play called Shakuhachi.
Hmm.
And the piece ends with Zoami as the main actor playing the shakuhachi and then walking up. So it seems like between Muniaki's great grandfather and Zoami that the shakuhachi was part of the cultural sphere. I mean, to the point that it's on stage in the kind of dramatic form of the time, and you have Zeami, who's one of these big figures of the Sarugaku world, kind of saying, as he says in the text, that Zoami kind of played the shakuhachi one-handed and then walked off stage was chiller than the chill
Hmm.
is the expression. So it's like, in other words, this was cold. You would say nowadays, this was so cold. So he's basically saying he's that damn cool for doing that.
Now, Toyohara himself didn't play shakuhachi, right? He was a show player. If I'm
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, so the Toyohara family is a show family, but it seems like his grandfather, and it seems he also says another kind of relative in another person in the house also played it because when his great grandfather dies, it's Zoami and Kazuaki, this other member of the family, who kind of put together the images that are there in Muniaki's Taigen show.
Mm-hmm.
So they kind of put the images together and kind of preserve the knowledge that way. So
Now, of course, we have a video together on my channel about the Taigen show, and I think we call it the courtly elephant in the room, which is about some common mistranslations of it. So I highly recommend people go and check that video out. I'm going to link that in the chat now after I find it. But what would you say? What's revealing about the Taigen show? What does it tell us that we haven't been aware of recently, or something that we've just been pushing aside?
I think that it just shows that it had a place in Gagaku, and that there is this way of connecting Gagaku and Shakuhachi together. I mean, we talk about there's the talk of the Gagaku Shakuhachi, but no one really knows how it is played. Right? There's the Shakuhachi in down in Nara in the Shosoin, right, in the Shosoin collection. But we don't really know how that was played. Taigen Show kind of gives us a sense of what the shakuhachi looked like, the measurements of it, the pitch relationships, what whole sounded what in according to Gagaku. So it's, to me, interesting because it's this first connection between the two that we can really talk about rather than just simply saying it's there and we don't know how it sounded. So this is actually kind of beginning to say, okay, this is how it might have sound because we can at least follow the pitches that he kind of lays out and says a shakuhachi with these pitches would sound like this. And how might that then be something that would be used by, a court player, a garaku player like Muniaki's grandfather, great grandfather?
Before we get into the next set of questions and continuing our interview with LeRon Harrison, I just want to encourage you to like the video, subscribe to the channel if you aren't subscribed, and if you want to learn more about Shakuhachi, hit that join membership button and come on along and get the Shakuhachi bug and love the instrument the way I do. Anyways, so now let's talk about two of the scenes that you mentioned, because there's one I'm interested in because I'm not familiar with it, and then the one I am familiar with. So can we start with the episode that happens in the Taigen show, and what's happening with this with Muniaki's great grandfather who's playing Shakuhachi?
Okay, so the basic story is that he goes down to the rehearsal at Iwashimizu Hachimangu. So it's the major shrine just outside of Kyoto. If you go on the Keihan line nowadays, it'll be there at a stop called Yawata. So he goes up the mountain, and then there's these kids that are there. We don't know, if they're kind of part of the ritual or they're just kind of family members of people involved in it. But there's kids there. He kind of follows them around. So the first time when I read that, I'm like, okay, well, if he's there at this rehearsal, but he's not part of the actual festival, because the festival will be 2 days later. So, but he follows the kids around and is there, and then after the rehearsal is done, they have the banquet. So again, this is all part of the festival is there to make the deity happy, and so to make the deities happy, you have to make everybody that's involved happy. And so you have all the people who are doing this dress rehearsal, you give them this banquet to make them happy. And that's when he comes in and plays the shakuhachi. And he plays the shakuhachi, and it draws a deer near to him. And so the kids, it turns out, make this comment that, oh yeah, because he's got the skills to bring this deer in. They're like, yeah, if he were to play, we'd be able to catch all these bugs. He'd be able to bring a swarm of bugs for us to catch. So and that story.
And this is kind of like the, if for those who remember the old school Pokemon game Bug Catcher, the bug catcher you have to battle in Pokemon. Yeah. So all those kabutomushis, like that's what kids in Japan, even up in today, love to collect and have them fight each other and see whose kabutomushi can knock off the other one from the tree stump, as it were. So there's a lot. That's really interesting. And to use the quote from Zoami, is that he's the cool of cool. He's the cold of cold. But it's really fascinating. So he's not a part of the actual musical event, but he's a really great player. He shows up, and everybody seems to like him, especially the kids.
Well, I take it as he's there as the kind of entertainment for the banquet. So that's why it's like he's not part of the actual festival.
Not the So
festival, but he's there for the banquet, the same way like you would have a band come and play for the wedding, right? They may not be part of the actual wedding ceremony, but they're there for
I see.
reception after the wedding. So that's what his job is.
So you got the string quartet, which is the Pachelbel's canon for the wedding, and that's your Kagura ensemble for the deity, and the shakuhachi is the band and DJ for the party.
Yeah,
I like it. So shakuhachi is the cool instrument. So it's really interesting. Because that part of it still to me was like a little bit like, well, what is his purpose there? But if he's kind of like really is entertainment for the festivity part of it. Now, is that festivity part of it when he's playing, is that still considered gagaku, or would that be something else on its own because it doesn't have the ensemble part of it?
It would still be considered court music. So So yeah, so it's still part. This is still part of court life. So it would still be part of court music. And again, the nice thing about it is back then they wouldn't even call it garaku. It's just simply gaku. It's music,
Mm,
right? So that's the nice part about it. So if you got to go true to the text, then he's just doing gaku, right? He's doing music. So it's not
mm.
necessarily court music. It's already assumed to be court music because everybody there is largely from the court.
Yes,
So so that's the way to kind of best think about it, is to think about it as he's doing court music because he's doing music at a court event.
I see. Now, I want to move to the Zoami play and this no play here because this is an area where I'm not familiar at all. Does the text or does the play itself have shakuhachi in it where it should be performed, or is the player on stage just acting as if they're playing shakuhachi?
We don't know because again, unfortunately, it's not one of those plays that survived. So all we have is Zeami's statement about it in his conversations on Saruraku.
Uh,
So
yeah.
yeah, so we don't really know what the play was like and whether, again, and that's also the question about Zoami. Was it a sense of Zoami studied this and then wrote the play? It's the chicken and egg situation with this.
Mm,
Did Zoami study Shakuhachi with, the Toyohara family and then create this play? Or was this play there and he went to the Toyohara family to learn how to play it, to be able to kind of be able to play it, right? It was just simply miming the playing, and Zoami then decided to go, you know what? Let me learn how to do it and really put that special seasoning on it.
yeah, it's kind of like an actor in a Hollywood film actually learns how to play cello or violin to then play it,
Yeah.
and then what you're hearing is actually what that person is playing rather than, a professional playing over it. So I get that.
Mm.
So if it's the case of him being the cold of cold, then maybe he really did. But when again, like
Yeah.
you said, it's a little bit unfortunate that we'll never know. But sometimes the mysteries are fun about that. It's like there's a story of Beethoven when he's doing his piano duel against Maestro Steinbelt. People talked about Beethoven's. He takes Steinbelt's notes, flips them upside down, and then improvises for like hours on end. And people say it's just the most gorgeous and beautiful music that you could ever hear. And Beethoven's improvisations were just something out of this world, way better than his compositions. And you go, wow, would love to have heard that or had someone write it down, but it's lost in history. So maybe
Yeah.
Zoami's masterful shakuhachi playing will also be the same. Now the thing that's interesting though with the Taigen show, and it also seems like some maybe in the no place too, that the shakuhachi here is a 5-hole instrument and not a 6-hole instrument like what we find in the shosoin. Now, is that because it's coming from the Tang court that's going through Korea and their gifts, and so they're not like the shakuhachi innovated version of it, or is how much did all of these instruments change from the Tang court when they came to Japan?
Another question, we don't really know what happened. And again, it might have been that they both came over from the continent and, the 6-hole one got used more than the 5-hole, and then the 5-hole was kind of rediscovered and made that way. So again, is we just don't know. This is the kind of point about, the records just don't kind of give us an indication what was going on. We do know that a lot of the continental music came over and was largely played by a lot of the temples in Nara. So that also kind of is one place that, especially, once one person that gets mentioned in the Shakuhachi history a lot is Ikkyu Zenji,
Mm.
right? So I mean, again, this could have been something that was in, a temple like Kofukuji or Yakushiji or any of these temples that had served as these kind of musical repositories and played the music in Nara period. and might have kept tradition down, but we don't know them as pronounced as we know that Kofukujin Kasuga complex maintained, you know, the Garaku music there and was one of these seats where Garaku was maintained and taught and all of that. So again, it's just another one of these mysteries that's there because we don't know, we don't have records that can tell us one way or the other.
So I know we talked a little bit about this before the live stream started, and I know it's another area that's a little bit of a mystery, and so I would like the scholastic answer and then the speculation afterwards. Sometimes in court speculation is allowed, but it has to always be given permission by the judge. So the scholastic answer first. How was the shakuhachi, or was the shakuhachi used within the court music?
It seems like it was used at court.
Mm-hmm.
The primary example that's given is the Suetsuma Hana chapter of Genji, the Safflower chapter of Genji. There's a moment in there where they, and that chapter is a lot of Chinese stuff. Suetsuma Hana herself plays the king, and then you have this moment where it's the shakuhachi and the o hichirihi are played at court. So clearly we have that. And again, following the documentary evidence in Taigen Show, you can find a reference that goes back to O Kagami, to the Great Mirror, of a performance of shakuhachi at court in kind of the Insei period in the 12th century. So we clearly see the shakuhachi in these records being played. So Genji is fictional, but the O Kagami is more historical. It's a Rekshi Monogatari, a historical tale. But again, that has more of a historical feel to it, and you take it more at face. It gives you more historical credibility. So the scholarly answer would be the record shows that it was played. The speculative answer is that, and this is where we were kind of talking about it, is the question is, was it played with the other instruments that are normally associated with Garaku?
Yeah.
There's the question of, and the speculation is it probably wasn't. And
let the court see that this is speculation. Can we get that written down quickly?
Well, going off of that episode in Genji, and then to follow it up with the episode in Okagami that Muniaki cites, it seems like these are moments where it's kind of set aside and brought out to be played, and it's not being played with music like Eitendaku or any of these kind of extant pieces that are normally kind of in that Garaku ensemble. So it seems like there's still this element of how it was done in the continental court. I'm back on the continent in China, where it was like, okay, just bring these instruments out and let them play. And the Okagami one says there were scores for it. Again, we don't have the record of what the scores were, but I would think that would be the way it is. The best speculation I would say is that it was just kind of let these instruments kind of play together and play kind of extemporaneously, as opposed to a set score that was already there for them to play.
This reminds me and sounds a lot like early Baroque music, in the sense of like you have a melodic line and you have a figured bass line. And it really didn't matter what instrument joined in to play those things. They just wanted people to join in and play those things. And kind of what I'm getting from that is like, yeah, if there was a shakuhachi player that could play the Ryuteki line and it sounded nice and it went along with that, it could had all the notes with it, then by all means join in and play. So I kind of like this as a possibility. But at the other thing too at the same time though is that the if we're considering this old shakuhachi as the hitoyogiri, something much shorter and has a very limited range, it really isn't a powerful instrument, and I don't see it holding up alongside with all the other instruments on stage as well. And I think that this is a crucial aspect of it where we can kind of speculate on there as well, is that it's unlikely because of the design of the instrument itself.
It one of the things about court music is there was a tendency to favor the strings. So there is a practice in court music called nokorigaku, which literally kind of means something like remnant music. And it would be a full ensemble, and then you would have the kind of backup wind instruments drop, and just have the lead instruments playing. And then the show drops out, and then the Buteki drops out, and it's just the Hichiriki and the strings playing, and the percussion drops out as well. So it just leaves the strings alone, and the strings start to improvise, and the Hichiriki kind of starts to improvise and kind of bend the phrase a little bit. And if you kind of think about something like that, that's where I would say it might have a shot. Because, again, if the hitoyogiri is not as powerful, it would seem like it would be a good accompaniment for the strings to let the strings kind of come forward. So, so that's another angle of where it could fit in, is that if you're just kind of letting a string player, letting a biwa player or a koto player kind of play, and there's some player of the shakuhachi or a hitoyogiri who's there, and they can kind of keep accompaniment with it, you kind of have this nice soft wind sound there, but it's still allowing the strings to kind of have the main part of the stage.
Do strings take precedent over vocal music, like when you have roe as well, or does the lyrics come to the front?
Lyrics tend to be the dominant part of Roy,
Okay.
but it's the same sort of situation where it's just one of each instrument. Percussions are out, and it's just one ryuteki, one hichiriki, one sho, one biwa, one koto,
Hmm.
right? That's kind of sitting there, and then the singing is there.
Interesting.
So the singing kind of takes the stage, and everything else is trying to accompany along with it.
Well, thank you so much for answering all those questions on Gagaku. I see some of the comments here that of like I'm unfamiliar with this topic, so I'm just soaking it all in. So I think everybody's just enamored with all of the new information that's coming in. So I think it's absolutely fantastic. I'd like to move on to another topic, which is just general Japanese history. So all questions about
Okay.
general Japanese history are now welcome. With is there one point in Japanese history that you find to be the most interesting?
No, I think there's things interesting about most of the history of Japan. My training is largely Heian Kamakura, so so that's where I was trained at. But again, right, Taigen Sho is late Muramachi,
Hmm.
right? So that will be outside of what I feel. But Muramachi is an interesting period because it's the period of social mobility, and you've got, you know, the high and the low ranking together, right? You've got Ashikaga Takauji, the third shogun, kind of taking an affection. What sort of affection we still haven't really figured it out.
There's a love
But he
triangle
takes
somewhere.
affection. There's an affection for this, young boy Zeami, to bring him into kind of the world of court life and his public life, that he kind of then brings in to elevate Sarugaku to what eventually becomes No. But again, there is that you have someone like Muneaki, who is a court musician who's teaching the emperor, but who is also friends with you know, Socho, the major Benga poet of the time. So the Muromachi period is fascinating because of that dynamic, that you have all these kind of people of different ranks doing
Yes.
all these different cultural art forms together. You know, Tokugawa is interesting because of the way they tried to kind of stamp down on that and try and put everybody in their place, and
Yeah,
watching how
reestablish that
people
caste system.
are how people are kind of violating the rules, and saying, you know what, no, we're gonna do this, we're doing this on the slide, you can do this, and you could we'll honor it in faith, but when we don't have to honor it, we're not honoring it.
So
So
that
so
big
that's also
change
fascinating too.
that big change that you're talking about from or throughout the Heian era into the Muromachi era is this idea of social mobility, that if you were within the courtly caste, you're within the courtly caste. If you're outside of that, you're outside of that. There is no moving in and working with them. And of course, without outside of that courtly caste as well, you have artisans and so on and so forth, and they all have their own caste and they communicate with their people, but intercommunication between these groups is just not happening. But then the Muromachi era comes in, and that's completely squashed. And like you're saying, you have people from lower caste system dining and dancing with upper class, and upper class going down to the lower class and communicating. And I think Socho is a great example, who also does write about Shakuhachi a little bit. And but there's one character that I would like to ask about, because I think this is another mystery. I've heard some answers about this, but in the Tsurezuregusa, we have a very
Mhm.
interesting scene with the Boroboro or Bojinga, who are
Uh,
playing Shakuhachi. Now there seems to be two different types of Boroboro that exist. There was these very high class Boroboro, which actually comes from a Sanskrit word. It's not a Japanese word. And those are like Hijirikai. They're related to the Shingon sect from Koyasan. And then you have the Boroboro, because they are Boroboro and they don't have a lot of money. They're probably mendicants. They're wandering from one place to another. Can you talk a little bit about that book, the author, and a little bit about that scene?
all right, Yoshida Kinko, the author of Surezuregusa, which is translated in English as Essays in Idleness, um, was largely a recluse. So he kind of came from that cultural world of the court, and then just kind of just moved away from it and just was off on his own and writing these essays about his view. The Boro Boro one, if it is the one that I'm thinking about, because I know I was looking at this in regards to, um, because this is the Boro Boro that people like Gunnar Jimmy Linder kind of talk about as where the Shakuhachi is coming from.
Yes.
That's the passage you're
Yeah,
talking
that's
about.
the one I'm talking about.
Okay, so that passage is interesting because it doesn't really fit into all of that. The Boro Boro that are in there that are mentioned are actually not Shingon. They're actually, well, we don't really know what they are, but they're practitioners of Nimbutsu. So, and they're rather violent practitioners of Nimbutsu, because the passage that I'm thinking about is, the one comes up and challenges the other, and they both get killed at the end. At the
Yeah,
end of the
that's the one.
story,
That's the one.
and Kinko is kind of like, yeah, these people are just kind of like savages. They will they will just kill each other over the smallest things. So, and again, the part of that Linder kind of ignores is that they are practicing the Nembutsu. And again, to go back to kind of Socho's journal talks about a Jodoshu priest who commits suicide but was also a shakuhachi player. So so I think between kind of that, you get the sense of there's a whole other side of where the shakuhachi is in the society of Japan. And that's one of the things I think that can come out of your discussion, and what you're kind of leading into, is that it seems like the shakuhachi, we've talked about it in the kind of world of the court, but definitely social points to, it seems like there's a jodo Shu bend. There's a Pure Land bend that it seems to be amongst Pure Land players that doesn't get any kind of attention amongst, you know, the Shakuhachi world. And so that's something for me that kind of is interesting, is to see what degree the Shakuhachi was over in the the Jodo world, and was it just Pure Land? Was it Jodo Shinshu? Was it New Sect? You know, as opposed to the Zen connection that gets hammered over and over and over again. It's like here we're actually going to see another line, and that's where it's going, because it's the same thing with Tiger Show, that that Muniaki was a Nichiren adherent, and it's like, okay, I never thought that Nichiren would have anything to do with Gagaku. We knew it was Tendai, we knew it was Jodo and Jodo Shinshu, we knew it wasn't Zen, and we knew it wasn't Nichiren. But here's this moment of where you've got this Nichiren connection, and it's like, let's see where it goes. And so the same thing is true for Shakuhachi. There's a Jodoshu connection that should be explored. If it doesn't turn out to be anything, shikataganai, right? Can't help that. That's either documentary or whatever. But it seems like there's a connection with Jodoshu, just like that's worthy of investigation.
Yeah, so there's a particular sect of Jodoshu monks who were like an offset. They were called Ikkoryu, and Ikko is ichi no, Ikko wa mukau no ho. And it was based on the guy named Ikko Shunsho, who was a very violent person, and they apparently had a song that was called the one note tune, where they would play a tune before doing mantras or stuff like that. Now there's a lot of things I'm not really sure about them historically, because finding stuff about a very weird sect from the early Kamakura era is very difficult to find a lot of resources on. But there seems to be a lot of people who actually pick up Hitoyogiri or Shakuhachi in that day and were playing it. A lot of the people who composed the pieces that Nick and I teach in our course are Jodoshu priests or monks. And so there's a huge connection there. But we find, it's kind of interesting, because what we find is you find a lot of Jodoshu monks who are just really interested in Neo-Confucianism, or they're really interested in some aspects of Zen. But more so than anything, the Neo-Confucian aspect seems to be so powerful in the time right at the end of the Heian era all the way up through the Meiji era. Do you have anything to add on Neo-Confucianism? Because that's an area where I think is always underrepresented in Japanese culture.
I mean, the Neo-Confucian situation, the book that my pieces in the...
Oh yeah, plug it. Plug it. Yeah. What's the name of the book?
Let me find the official name. It's the cultural history. Is Gagaku, the cultural impact of Japanese ceremonial music. I think that's the title of it.
Yeah, you guys can all just memorize that and search it up later. let me find the that Amazon link, because I know it's on Amazon and everybody should pick that up. Amazon.
But yeah, the conference that kind of gave birth to that book, a lot of the Japanese scholars were pointing out the way that the samurai of the Edo period were using Gagaku. And one of them kind of points out, right, they're doing this in the Sekiten, in these rituals for Confucius. And so in Edo, you see this connection between, Gagaku and people like Ogyuso, Arai, Hakuseki, right? They're thinking about Neo-Confucian. When it comes to music, Neo-Confucians, like those people say, Gagaku is what is the music that will fit that. So
Mm.
yeah, and so
That
there's a
so
lot of that.
Now that's an interesting thing that you say there. So they aren't actually doing necessary deity worship to the kami. They're not doing worship, or I know some people say that Buddhists don't worship Shakyamuni Buddha. Rather, they worship the ideals. But that being put aside, they're worshiping Confucius. This so how does that work?
It works just like it's pretty much the same thing like a deity. It's not that you're worshiping it; it's that you're giving, food, you're giving music, you're presenting these things to the deity, right? And the
Hmm.
same thing is you're presenting them to Confucius. You're paying honor and respect to Confucius
Hmm.
for having lived, having written the Analects, for having put all that knowledge out, and that's the basis of what you in the present are doing. If you're Ogyu Sodai or Dai Hakuseki or any of these, you know, feudal lords that have taken up Confucianism, Neo Confucianism, as the way you are running your domain, right?
Hmm.
So that's the way to think about it. It's not so much worship, but it's again paying respect, paying homage, and that's the best. That's the way you would see it as, right. You aren't worshiping the Buddha. You are paying respect to the Buddha because the Buddha gave this knowledge. And the
Hmm.
same way that with the kami, it's like you're not necessarily worshiping the kami. You are paying respect to the deity, especially right if you are going to do something on the land, do something to the land, right? You pay respect to it to be like, all right, I'm doing this. Please don't be angry.
Hmm.
Please see, my intentions is not to kind of mess the land up, but to improve the land or to kind of stop this from happening.
Hmm.
So that same sort of respect is being shown, and it is equally shown between Buddhist deities, Shinto deities, and in this case Confucius.
Hmm. I always find in the Analects a really interesting passage is on when he writes that acts of worship or acts of where you're honoring the celestial world, as he says it, that those acts don't actually influence anything, but you should do those things as if it were to influence. Now, do the Japanese at this time, as when they're doing these things, are they holding to that and doing it more as like sort of a devotee sort of thing, or do they actually expect a physical change in the future like they were with the kami, or is that just an unknown area right now?
As far as why they're worshiping Confucius, we're
Yes.
putting this on Confucius. Largely, it's not being worshipped to kind of have Confucius do anything again. It's again to pay respect to Confucius, and
Mm.
also to kind of set the to set the right tone, right? To say this is what you should do, right? This
Mm.
this is how you behave, right?
Mm.
So it's more about kind of that social etiquette that again you pay your respects to Confucius, like you pay your respects to your elders, like you pay your respect to your parents.
Mm.
That's what you should do.
Mm. Mm. So it's pretty true to the Analects, and like they are following those concepts and ideas that are espoused in the Neo-Confucian teachings.
Yeah, they wouldn't they if you're gonna take Confucius and put him in the center way, you can't do it in a way that disrespects what he says. So
Yeah. Really fascinating stuff, especially with samurai etiquette can be a full course at a university level. Neo Confucianism can have its own course, and then Neo Confucianism in Japan. So of course we only get to hit just like not even the tip of the iceberg. We took like a little shaving off the top of the part that you can see.
yeah.
I suppose to end this live stream out because we're just at almost at the top of the hour. What is the number one thing, or maybe one or two things that are a really common misunderstanding about Japanese history that you wish you could squash?
hmm, that what you see in things like Shogun and kind of that understanding of the samurai is just a moment in time. It is not the whole history of the samurai, right? And I think if people could understand the samurai as evolving, that is kind of one particular form of it. Because again, the whole thing about it is this whole sense, and especially it's the Bushido, right?
Mm,
If if Bushido could be given its proper context, then I would be a happy man
mm.
because Bushido gets projected back into the past, and it's like, no, that wasn't how it was in the Kamakura period. There was beef among family members. You have instances of cousins or brothers going to war throughout Kamakura and Muromachi. And it's like, no, there was this no sense of the samurai was loyal unto death. It's like, no. They were petty. They were petty in Kamakura. They were petty in Muromachi. You disrespected, a brother could disrespect his own brother, and next thing you know, they done set up camps and they are ready to go to war for this stuff over the smallest of instances.
Yeah, I think the
Samurai could be petty.
I think the most famous one is the Yoritomo. What is his family name?
Yeah, Yoshitomo Yoshitsune.
Yeah,
Is
Yoshitsune.
again that pettiness. That was just pettiness. It's like Yoshitsune then did all this fighting and took everybody out for you, then got rid of all the tyrant one, and then he comes back here and because Kajiwara then sat up here and yapped in Yoritomo's ear, saying this nonsense, and now he's chasing him all over Japan till his death. It's like pettiness.
Yes.
It's like you let your retainer on the side sit there and fill your head with nonsense and gassed you up, and now you done killed your brother over this. Pettiness.
Yeah, and I think that's just the most famous scene, probably in Japanese history. But this is, it's interesting. There's a book that you recommended to me, and now the whole entire book title is escaping me. It's about the Muromachi period in
The world turned upside down.
Yeah, the world turned upside
Yeah,
down.
that's where
And one of the things that I found was really interesting in there is like house fires and temple fires were common occurrences because of pettiness. They're like, well, this person said this, so I'm going to go up to their house and I'm going to light the whole thing on fire and kill everybody in there because I just don't like them. And this was common. And so yeah, and it does go away, but it takes a couple hundred years for things to kind of calm down a little bit because it builds up to the Onin Wars. If I'm not misunderstanding this.
Yeah, which was the Hatagayama brothers going to war with each other, and to bring it full circle to Muniaki in his introduction, he just simply says that he's like, okay, the New Year came. And then all of a sudden, the Hatagayama brothers had taken up their camps on different parts of the capital, and the war broke out.
Yeah, Kyoto's
Okay,
yeah.
wait, what? And it's like, wait, everything was cool. We rang in the New Year. Now all of a sudden, y'all pulling out swords and getting spears and ready to ram each other to death. What happened here?
Yeah, and then Kyoto's burned down. I'm gonna try to protect something while I still can, before it's too late.
Yeah. It's like get what you can't save, and that's literally what Muniaki kind of has to do. That
I was
just kind of take what they can and flee, save what you can, because these fools are out here burning. Burning was the raising stuff down was the favorite practice of the Onin War. So it's like, yeah, if you again to go back to the house fire, right? Set something on fire was the best way. So you built it, I will burn it.
All right. Well, absolutely amazing conversation. I'll just add, if there was one thing I could probably change, I wish there would be more focus on the Muromachi and Kamakura periods, because so much emphasis gets put onto Heian and Edo, and there's 500 years of history that happened, just about 500 years of history that happened there that get pretty much left out of the picture. It goes You get Sei Shonagon, you get, and then, of course, the Tale of Genji with Murasaki Shikabu, and then it jumps to Tokugawa. And everything in between just gets lost. But, LeRon, fantastic to have you on. You're always a wealth of knowledge, so much fun. Where can people find more about you, and where can people get some of your stuff?
Um, if you look my stuff up, if you're wanting to read my academic stuff up, you can find me on ResearchGate. I have ResearchGate and Academia, right? Both of those websites have kind of my one, but I've more moved to ResearchGate, so you'll find pretty much all of my pieces that I've written thus far there. So
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for tuning in. Make sure you like and subscribe, and check out that join membership button if you're interested in learning Shakuhachi. Until next time, row for 10.